Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn, and today's episode we're talking about AFC East data-based power rankings. So what I did over the last couple weeks after the draft concluded was do approximate value rankings on the current roster. So there's three main things that I looked at from a data perspective. I looked at what their actual past approximate value performances were on the roster. I looked at the data, so how good the data is for the prospects on the roster from an EAV or expected approximate value measure, and then I also looked at the age of the roster. So taking a look at the incoming rookies from a data perspective, taking a look at the free agency additions, taking a look at past performance on the rosters and the age of the roster, I was able to kind of formulate this list. Now, one thing before I start the list, understand this is kind of like a dynasty ranking to a certain extent for these teams because there's rookies that may take a year or so to get better. There's some rookies that may not even really contribute at all in a very meaningful way. Injuries can happen. So there's a lot of different things that can affect the rankings that I'm about to present to you. But this is in many ways like the canary in the coal mine for your team. So even though they might have had past success last year, this can indicate things in the future that may be problems. So I understand I might get some hate on this video from some people, but again, it's based on all the data that I just mentioned, and I do the best I can to be as accurate as possible with it. So with all that stuff out of the way, let's get to number 4 in this list, which is the Miami Dolphins. I was surprised to see the Dolphins ranked so low, but what it comes down to is the roster is older in terms of a lot of different prospects. It also needs multiple players to stay healthy and consistent, and most of the production is concentrated in the hands of a handful of players like Tyreek Hill, for example, who made it known that he wants to retire after 10 seasons. So, as much as the passing offense, a lot of people might disagree with the wide receiver ranking. This includes Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and Braxton Berrios in that list. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of those guys are eating because of things that Tyreek Hill is doing. And once Tyreek Hill leaves, based on data, it may not look that hot. They need a better wide receiver to kind of round out the three. Braxton Berrios is not a high-end player from an approximate value standpoint and from a data standpoint. He's kind of just a guy based on his overall data. And because of that, it affects the rankings. Now, another thing to also bring up is the Dolphins have star players doing a lot of heavy lifting, and it's dependent on coaching and scheme. So, the one thing I will say about the Dolphins is despite the fact that they do have the worst roster in the AFC East, from a data perspective, scheme can make players look better despite how they tested on the market. So, when you look at the overall offense for the Dolphins, it may not look that hot, but similar to like the Rams, you have scheme in place that kind of inflates numbers to a certain extent and can kind of make things look a little bit better overall. But in general, this is just kind of how the data went for the Miami Dolphins. Now, this is the rankings for the offensive positions. And again, I know a lot of people that are watching this video that are Miami Dolphin fans might turn off the video at this point, but the fact of the matter is, when you look at the quarterback position, you look at the running back, wide receiver, tight end, offensive line, skill talent areas of this offense from a data perspective, from how they actually have performed in the career of them, not just based on one season, I'm talking about consistency. And when you look at their data grades and the age of the roster, in terms of the wide receivers that are there, in terms of their age, talking about Berrios, talking about all the other players that are there, it's not that strong of a group. It really isn't. Now, there's a couple things that can help it. I think if Raheem Mostert kind of gets out of the way a little bit, because he's one thing that's kind of pushing the running back thing up. So if you take him out of there and you just leave it and look at them in terms of, uh, Arcane and Jalen, right, from Tennessee, this will look better. I think when you start taking out some of the wide receivers and put some younger ones in there, this will look a little bit better. But as the roster stands right now, with who's starting, this is what it looks like, okay, from the starter perspective. Not in terms of depth, but just in terms of starters on the offensive side of the football, which is not that great. It means that the foundation of the Dolphins long term is their quarterback position and nothing else. So they will need to have a lot of players really step up this year to kind of help these numbers out, because right now it's not looking too hot. Then we get to the defensive side of the football, where it's a similar situation. The edge position is very strong. It's a very strong group for the Dolphins. But the defensive tackle, the linebacker, the cornerback, and the safety positions are not so hot in terms of those positions. So this is another area where, again, the age of these prospects, the data of these prospects, and how they performed in the past is not helping them out so much in terms of the overall rankings for them. So this is another area that I think is a bit concerning in terms of future success. They're going to have to do a lot of catching up to do in many ways because of this. Then we get to number 3 on this list, which is the New England Patriots. Yes, I'm just as surprised as everybody else is. In terms of their data, the foundation of the Patriots is on the defensive side of the football, but the addition of Drake May and other offensive talent will push them up into the third best team in the AFC East. I don't expect the roster to immediately challenge the status quo. In other words, I kind of expect that the Patriots, because they have a new quarterback, to probably end up being the fourth best team. However, the roster can emerge as the third best and has the potential based on data. So I would expect the Patriots to be the fourth best team in terms of how I might rank them if I just was biased against everything. But when you look at them from a data perspective in terms of the long-term outcomes for them, they do have some positives to their roster. So what are some of those positives? Well, they obviously got Drake May. He is a quarterback who has decent testing and obviously good age profile, which kind of helps him out. You look at the running back position. That's an area I think they definitely need to address in the future. So I don't think their future running back is really on the roster right now. The wide receiver position, even though they took Jalen Polk and Javon Baker, those were two inconsistent prospects from a data perspective. So they will really need to put in the work to show that they can be long-term starters and consistent starters for them. And if they do, I think this will look a little bit better. But as it stands right now, again, taking it from a cautious perspective in terms of the rookies that were brought in, they would be kind of like 27th in the NFL. Then, of course, you look at the tight end position. This is another area that actually is kind of strong for them. And in terms of offensive line, they definitely could need some improvements there as well. So for the most part, the New England Patriots offense is really not that great. They do have hope in terms of the quarterback that they have right now, Drake May, but they do need a lot of players to step up and kind of emerge. And I don't necessarily think the data is there for that to happen. I mean, we'll see what happens, but it'd be it's very optimistic at this point. I would say, or I'm probably more hopeful. It's more hopeful because again, optimism is fact based. Hope is you have no basis for it. It's just your emotions. But yes, the Patriots, in terms of long term outcomes, they do have a better roster compared to other teams in the AFC East. Now, when you get to the defensive side of the football, the edge position is a very, very big weak point for them. The age of their edge rushers, and also in terms of their overall defense, it's decent, but again, they don't really have the edge rushers there. So this is a very defensive-minded football team, and I think because of that, that's kind of why I had them third. That's why the data kind of likes them third best, because the defensive side of the football has a lot of young talent, a lot of really good, solid, productive players, but the edge rusher position definitely is a weak point, but when you look at the overall defense, I think there are some positives there. So that's why, again, I say that there's a case to be made that the Patriots have a team that could emerge as the third best team in the AFC East. I think that's very much possible for them when you look at their overall data. So we'll see what happens, but that's definitely something to kind of consider here. Number 2 on this list, of course, is the New York Jets. The Jets have an elite defense and a strong offense if Rodgers stays healthy, which is a big if. There are some issues with the offensive line. However, the Jets are poised to earn at least second prize in the AFC East. This roster has the potential to knock the Bills off the top spot. However, it would take some dysfunction from the Bills to do that. So I'm not gonna disagree with people who say, well, how can you possibly have the Jets at number two if it all depends on Aaron Rodgers being healthy, which is a true point, but the same thing could be said for the Dolphins. If Tua goes down, are you still going to have them as the second or third best team? How some people might have them. But overall, when you actually look at the Jets from a data perspective on their offense, they're very solid. The quarterback position is strong if Aaron Rodgers is healthy and does what he has done consistently in his career. You're talking about a top seven quarterback in the NFL. If you're talking about the running back position there, they have a lot of depth, a lot of young talent. Brees Hall, and of course, all the additions they made during the offseason. So they have a lot of depth at the running back position. The wide receiver position, to me, is a little overrated. I think they did select some players like Garrett Wilson, who is decent, but again, they have not really produced like an elite wide receiver core. And because of that, that's why they're kind of like 19th in terms of this particular area. And of course, Malachi Corley, we really don't know what he is exactly until he actually plays this year. So being conservative with his data made them 19. Also, the tight end position is pretty solid, and the offensive line is a weak point for them. They've had a lot of offensive linemen that have been able to be starters for them, but they also have had a lot of injuries and a lot of inconsistent play. And because of that, that's why the ranking is what it is for the Jets. Then when you get to the defensive side of the football, the Jets' defense is pretty solid all around. The defensive tackle position is by far their strongest area. Linebacker is about average for the NFL. Edge is the same sort of thing. Cornerback, defensive safety. And again, I'm talking about the depth. I'm not talking about individual players. I'm talking about the depth of the roster. So overall, they would have probably the second best defense in the NFL when you look at the overall talent and data that they have there. So this is again a team where if Aaron Rodgers stays healthy, the defense does what it does. You could easily make a case for them being the top team in the AFC East, or at the very least being the second best team when you take a look at all their data collectively. So because of that, I would say the New York Jets would be number two. Then, of course, we get to the number one team, which I don't think it should be surprising. Some people might be surprised, but it would be the Bills. So, after going through all the data for the Buffalo Bills, the Bills, despite losing offensive talent and defensive talent, they still have a very strong offense. I think the defense will take a step back, though. So, the defense has always been a very high strength for the Bills, but I think this year they're going to take a little bit of a step back. But the offense and the defense still are decent enough that when you combine those two areas together, it makes them look pretty strong. So I expect the Bills to have a couple hiccups, of course, as they get used to a new skill position group at wide receiver. However, the Bills team is the best roster in the AFC East based on data, and the future looks bright for them. So when you look at the offensive side of the football, and you look at all the ranks here, they're pretty decent all around. The quarterback position, running back, wide receiver are all within the league average in terms of the overall data and everything. The tight end position is definitely a position of strength. And then, of course, you have the offensive line position. So everything about the Bills makes them a pretty serviceable offense. And again, this is being conservative based on their data potential. So this is a team that the sky's the limit in terms of what they could do, but this is, again, being conservative for what they have. Then, of course, you get to the defensive side of the football where the cornerback and safety position and linebacker position, I'm kind of taking a step back. But even with taking a step back, they still have a very strong core in terms of their interior defensive linemen. You look at the edge position, the defensive tackle position for the Bills, and all those other areas, and they still are very strong and from that kind of perspective in terms of their starting roster. So, despite the fact that they won't really have the best secondary as they've had in the past, being the Bills were one of the best passing defenses for a decent amount of time. I think they're kind of reversing things a little bit. They still have that strength in terms of the defensive line, and the secondary might take a little bit of a step back, but I think even with all that, I think the Bills' offense will be able to kind of carry some of the slack that the defense is kind of lacking. Finally, we get to the offensive ranks. So this is the big picture view of them from a data perspective. Again, the grading for this takes into account three main areas. It takes into account past NFL AV performances, takes into account their data grades in terms of their pre-draft profiles coming out of college, which can kind of give you insight into what they might become at the NFL level. And then it also takes into account the age of the roster because as prospects get older, their injury risk increases, their standard of play decreases. A lot of stuff happens as players get older there isn't this fountain of youth at the quarterback or the running back or the wide receiver positions. There really isn't. You have a decline in play. And because of that, that can affect things here. So, but overall, this is kind of how the ranks are. Again, at the quarterback positions, the best quarterback would probably be Aaron Rodgers in terms of past performances and stuff like that. And it comes down to passing efficiency. It comes down to not being a crazy, turnover issue kind of player, which is what Josh Allen has kind of been in his career. He definitely has gotten better, but again, it's about his collective career. So as he's able to put more time in terms of reducing his turnover numbers, this can kind of help things out. Looking at the other positions, you can kind of see everything from here. And then, of course, you go to the defensive side of the football, where, again, the weakest link in terms of all these teams is the Miami Dolphins. So, again, I know that I'm probably going to get some hate from Miami Dolphin fans for this video, but again, from a data perspective, from a long-term perspective, those are the weaknesses. Those are the weaknesses. And yes, I think the coaching staff for the Dolphins, I think the scheme that they've been able to do and all that stuff can help them out. I really think so. But coming into this year, I'm a little bit spooked. I really am. Now, as training camp comes into focus, we're going to finally see who actually starts. That's definitely going to affect these rankings. I'm probably going to do another ranking right before the NFL season starts. But this is kind of how things stack up right now before training camp and everything. And hopefully some things change. Like I said, I think a lot of the issues with the Dolphins come down to the age of a lot of their starters. Monster being in his 30s. Of course, you have a lot of other positions where again they're older, and because of that, it's going to affect the data to a certain extent. But overall, this is the rankings for the AFC East from the best team to the worst team from a data perspective. Again, this is my first year doing this kind of stuff, so a lot of you guys will show me your stuff from last year. I don't really have anything from last year to kind of point to, but this is kind of how things stack up, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you so much for watching. Check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/jcoburn. Also, check out my formerly known as Twitter account at Geometrics, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.